It's week 4 of the Power of 40, dedication during discouragement. We talked a lot this week, if you were able to watch the sermon, we talked a lot about the story of David and Goliath from 1 Samuel chapter 17. But today's devotion, I want to back up in the story just a little bit. And we did talk about this briefly this past weekend. But the thing that I want to be able to bring to light is how this story begins with King Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, the Lord rejects Saul as king of Israel. And it's because Saul had a series of plans that he was to carry out. He was supposed to go and totally annihilate the Amalekites. And Saul does this, at least he does to the extent that he believes is necessary, but not completely as the Lord had instructed. And so Samuel, the prophet, has to come to Saul and share that the Lord was disappointed with Saul's carrying out of these plans. Of course, Saul goes on to argue with Samuel, suggesting that he did exactly as the Lord had planned. And Samuel has to confront Saul in this moment to be able to share, you've not completely done this. He did it in part. And so, as they're looking through this passage, Samuel's words to King Saul in this moment are profound for us today. Because I sometimes think that we on Sundays or when we're worshiping those kinds of experiences, think that we can bring these offerings before the Lord, but then we've not been obedient, or we've not been living out our faith throughout the rest of the week, somehow thinking that what we offer in a worship service is what the Lord's looking for. And it is in part what he's looking for, but not completely. And let me read to you what he says. Saul is looking to go and worship and to make sacrifice before the Lord, after Samuel had just confronted him with this word of this incomplete plan that he'd done. He says in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22, "But Samuel replied, 'Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king.'" And I think the importance in this passage for us is to realize that the kind of life we live, really worship should be an overflow from our obedience. How we live throughout the week, the kind of decisions that we make. Sure, obedience and making the right decision and living a perfect life, these aren't things that are going to win us salvation. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about, a heart that's dedicated to the Lord will naturally want to obey him. It will want to follow his commands that we see in Scripture. Our worship isn't enough. We can come into worship, certainly, and we should, but our worship should be an overflow from our obedience. Or another way to put it, our offering should be an overflow from our obedience. To live in the way that God has instructed, to follow his commands, will produce a life that can then offer worship as an incredible sacrifice to the Lord. Our sacrifices, our offerings, should never take the place of our obedience. So my encouragement to you this week is to look at what God is saying to us in his word. Look at the kind of life he's calling us to live. And it's through that obedient life, that life dedicated to what the Lord has called us to do, can then very naturally and very freely offer our sacrifice, offer our worship to a God who so deserves it. God bless you. I hope you have a great rest of your week.